On the afternoon of May 4, 2018, the atmosphere at the Dayton Police Department's 2nd District Precinct was somewhat quiet. Outside, a light drizzle seemed to slow the pace of life. The clock on the wall had just struck 2:30 p.m. when the door to the duty officer's room was suddenly pushed open. A young man dressed in a construction worker's uniform, still splattered with plaster, rushed in, his face pale and his breathing ragged. He leaned on his knees, struggling to catch his breath to form a coherent sentence, and exclaimed that there had been a murder and they needed help. The duty officer, Officer David Chen, immediately sprang to his feet. He told the man to calm down and ask him what was going on, urging him to tell him slowly. The construction worker, his voice still trembling, introduced himself as Henry Miller. He explained that he worked at a nearby construction site and had gone to Anna's Salon on Quincy Alley for a haircut during his lunch break. When he got there, he saw the metal roll-up door was only partially down, not locked. He called out a few times but nobody answered. Thinking the owner was out for a bit, he pushed the door open and sat down to wait. He then looked into the back room, the bedroom, and saw Anna. He exclaimed that she was dead, with no clothes on, and there was some kind of cord mark around her neck. The fragmented but horrifying report instantly made the air in the duty room tense. Officer Chen knew this was not a false alarm. He immediately reassured the witness while using his radio to urgently report the entire incident to the precinct command and the Dayton Police Department headquarters. Just 5 minutes later, the 2nd District's rapid response team was at the scene, a small hair salon named Anna's Salon, tucked deep inside Quincy Alley. The scene inside perfectly matched the witness's testimony. Recognizing the extreme severity of a case involving murder, sexual assault, and robbery, the scene was immediately secured with a strict cordon. The case details were urgently reported up to the Chief of Police's office. Before long, the most elite units from the Dayton PD, including the Homicide Unit and the Crime Scene Unit CSU, arrived to take control of the scene. Directly commanding the investigation was Detective Lieutenant Mark Davis, head of the Homicide Unit, an investigator known for his meticulousness and sharp insight. Stepping inside, Lieutenant Davis could not help but feel a pang of sorrow. The victim was Anna Tran, 32, a gentle single mother raising a young child on her own. The small salon, the source of livelihood for her and her child, had now become the horrific stage for a heinous crime. The scene was chaotic. Belongings were ransacked, and drawers were torn open, showing clear signs of a robbery. Lieutenant Davis ordered them to process the scene, his voice low and firm. The Crime Scene Unit began their work. Under the direction of Sergeant Frank Miller, the CSU lead, every square inch of the scene was scrutinized. Forensics technicians in white protective suits began their standard procedure, photographing and video recording the entire context, drawing a detailed diagram of the object's positions and the victim's body. Sergeant Miller told the lieutenant that the scene was heavily disturbed and finding fingerprints would be extremely difficult. He noted that the perpetrator was experienced and likely wore gloves or wipe-down surfaces. They were dusting every possible surface that could hold a print. The on-site examination of the body was conducted shortly after. Medical examiners identified numerous bruises and abrasions on the victim's body, evidence of a fierce struggle. The victim had been sexually assaulted. A deep ligature mark on her neck, causing bruising and subcutaneous hemorrhaging, was identified as the primary cause of death. About 2 feet from the body, technicians found a 24-inch piece of green nylon cord with several strands of hair stuck to it. This cord was immediately sealed as evidence, identified as the murder weapon. Meanwhile, other investigative teams were deployed. A canvass for security cameras in the area yielded no positive results. The small alley was in an old residential area, and no cameras were positioned to capture anyone entering or leaving the salon the previous night. Witnesses, mostly neighbors, could not provide any breakthrough information. They only knew that Anna's Salon closed around 9 p.m. and no one had heard any unusual noises. The victim's body was then transported to the county coroner's office for a full autopsy to obtain the most accurate scientific conclusions. The results came back just a few hours later. The report confirmed that Anna Tran died from mechanical asphyxiation due to strangulation. The time of death was determined to be between 11 p.m. on May 3rd and 1 a.m. on May 4th. Most importantly, The medical examiners had successfully collected a significant amount of seminal fluid from the victim's vaginal cavity. Lieutenant Davis said during an emergency case briefing held that night that they had the killer's DNA. With other leads being almost non-existent, this was the golden thread, the most valuable piece of scientific evidence that could unmask the perpetrator. A case file, designated 318H, was established. The task force assessed it as a complex case. The killer acted professionally, carefully eliminating evidence, which suggested premeditation. However, the fact that he left behind a DNA sample suggested he might be either reckless or a first-time offender, unaware of the advances in forensic science. The first line of investigation was drawn: review everyone with a relationship or acquaintance with the victim, especially male subjects. The victim was a single, attractive woman. She would certainly have a complex social circle. Lieutenant Davis commanded decisively for them to make a list of every man connected to the victim, Anna Tran. He instructed them to divide the men into groups: family, friends, regular clients, and romantic interests, if any. He stressed that they needed to reconstruct the victim's entire social life from the recent past and to start with the ex-husband. Case 318H was launched with urgent speed. Lieutenant Davis's order set a single, clear path: reconstruct the entire social network of the victim, Anna Tran. Screen every male subject who had contact with her in the past few months, leaving no one out. The killer's DNA sample, collected at the scene, was the golden key, the only tool to verify and eliminate suspects. The first person to come under scrutiny was Chris Wagner, 35, the victim's ex-husband. The reason for bringing him in was not just because he was the closest relationship from her past, but also due to the simmering conflicts between them after their divorce. Detectives quickly verified that after remarrying, Wagner's business had not been doing well, and he had gotten into gambling, accumulating significant debt. By extracting the message history from the victim's phone, they found numerous texts from Wagner asking to borrow money from Anna, ranging from small amounts of $50 or $100 to larger sums of a few $100s. Some messages had a pleading tone, while others were filled with resentment and blame when he was refused. The motive of murder for robbery was entirely plausible. In the interrogation room at the Dayton Police Department, Chris Wagner appeared calm but could not hide his surprise and annoyance at being summoned. Wagner said that he and Anna had been divorced for 3 years and had nothing to do with each other anymore, questioning why he had been called in. An investigator stated that they were just following procedure and asked him to tell them where he was and what he was doing on the night of May 3rd, into the morning of May 4th. Wagner answered immediately, without a hint of hesitation, that he was at home with his wife and kid. He claimed he did not go anywhere all night and that his wife could vouch for him. The investigator then asked about his recent relationship with the victim, noting that they knew he frequently texted Anna Tran to borrow money. Wagner's face changed color slightly. He said it was a personal matter and that it was normal for him to ask her for a loan when he was having a tough time. He reasoned that she was the mother of his daughter, so what was wrong with her helping him out a little? But he insisted that he did not kill her to rob her, questioning how much money she could possibly have in that salon that would be worth him doing that. Wagner's statement seemed plausible. He was asked to provide a DNA sample for the investigation. Despite some hesitation, faced with the investigator's insistence, Wagner finally had to agree. Meanwhile, another team was at Wagner's home to verify his alibi. His new wife confirmed that her husband had been home all night. Although a wife's testimony could be subjective, it was still a factor to consider. A few days later, the DNA analysis results came back from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation (BCI). Chris Wagner's DNA did not match the killer's DNA found at the scene. The number one suspect was officially cleared. The investigation then expanded to the second group of subjects, regular customers and men who had shown interest in the victim. By reviewing phone contacts, social media accounts, and interviewing Anna's close friends, detectives compiled a list of nearly 20 individuals to investigate. This work was incredibly meticulous and time-consuming. Prominent on this list was a man named Michael Russo, 40, the owner of a small construction supply store. Russo was a regular client at the Salon. He was married but was infatuated with Anna's beauty. He frequently visited the salon not just for haircuts but also to flirt and give her gifts. According to a close friend of the victim, about a week before the murder, Anna had flatly rejected Russo's advances, which made him furious and led to him making some threatening remarks. This was a subject with a clear romantic motive. Michael Russo was brought in. Initially, he was evasive, claiming he only saw Anna as a little sister. But when investigators presented evidence of him transferring money and sending gifts, he finally admitted to pursuing the victim. However, when asked about the night of the murder, Russo provided a solid alibi. He stated that he was entertaining business partners at a major restaurant in the city until late at night. This alibi was quickly verified by detectives and found to be true. Nevertheless, Russo's DNA was still collected, and the result was, once again, a disappointment. No match. The investigation dragged on, hitting a dead end. One by one, names on the suspect list were called in, statements were taken, alibis verified, DNA samples collected, and then they were cleared. From regular customers and casual friends to even the local teenagers who would sometimes tease Anna, everyone was thoroughly screened. Over 50 DNA samples were sent for analysis, but not a single one matched. Time slipped by. 1 month, then 2. Case 318H was slowly grinding to a halt. The investigators on the task force all felt immense pressure. They had the killer's DNA, what should have been the strongest possible evidence, yet they could not find who it belonged to. This could only lead to the most frightening hypothesis, a nightmare for any homicide detective. During a case briefing, after hearing the team's report yet again on the lack of any breakthroughs, Lieutenant Mark Davis stood up, his face etched with fatigue but also determination. He addressed his colleagues, stating that after more than 2 grueling months of investigation, they had screened all suspects known to the victim but still had not found the killer. This forced them to re-examine the entire case from a different angle. He paused, looking around the room, and suggested that it was very possible they had been going in the wrong direction from the start. The theory that the killer was an acquaintance might be incorrect. It was very possible the perpetrator was a complete stranger to the victim. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what this hypothesis meant. If the killer was a stranger, a random attacker, then finding him would be like finding a needle in a haystack. There was no prior conflict, no connection to follow. He was like a ghost who appeared suddenly, committed a crime, and vanished back into the night. Lieutenant Davis continued, his voice heavy, stating that the case might have to be moved to inactive status. But that did not mean they were giving up. The file for case 318H would never be closed. The killer's DNA profile had been uploaded to CODIS, the National Crime Database. All law enforcement agencies across the country now had this information. He looked up at the board where a photo of Anna Tran still hung. He concluded that the killer was still out there, but he had left behind a trace that could never be erased. Someone who acts with such brutality, his animalistic nature would never change. Sooner or later, he would offend again, and that was when they would get him. Case 318H officially went cold, becoming a lingering concern, an unpaid debt for the homicide detectives of Dayton, owed to the public and the victim's family. All they could do was wait for the killer to reveal himself, or wait for him to commit another crime. Time passed. 6 long months had gone by since the horrific murder at Anna's salon. For the people of Dayton, the story of the unfortunate salon owner may have started to fade, overshadowed by the worries of daily life. But for the detectives of Case 318H, especially Lieutenant Mark Davis, it was an unpaid debt, a relentless burden. The case file remained prominently on his desk, occasionally reopened with the hope of finding a new clue, however small. The killer's DNA was in the national database, like a silent, invisible trap, waiting for the predator to return. Anna's salon was permanently closed, its rusted metal door a silent monument to a tragedy. Anna's young daughter was taken by her maternal grandparents to live with them in the countryside, a child who would have to grow up without her mother's warmth and with a large, unanswered question about the unjust death of the person who gave her life. Everything seemed to have reached a dead end. But evil is like a cancer. If not completely eradicated, it will metastasize and destroy somewhere else. On a morning in early October 2018, nearly 70 miles from Dayton, in a complex of workers' apartments in Columbus, Ohio, a similar tragedy reoccurred. This time, The victim was Sarah Jenkins, 28, a seamstress who worked from home. She was found dead in her apartment, also sexually assaulted and strangled to death. The scene was also ransacked, and the small amount of savings she had scraped together was gone. The Columbus Police Department quickly launched an investigation. The case bore a striking resemblance to the one in Dayton. The victim was a woman living alone, strangled, assaulted, and there were signs of a robbery. Just like in Dayton, there were no security cameras in the immediate vicinity, and neighbors had not heard any unusual noises. A ghost seemed to be repeating his crime in a new territory. However, there is a saying that criminals often forget: if you walk in the night long enough, you are bound to meet a ghost. The killer, after 6 months of laying low, had perhaps become complacent and overconfident. He made a fatal mistake, one he had not made in the first case. As the Columbus PD's crime scene unit meticulously processed every item in Sarah's small apartment, a young technician paid special attention to a glass tumbler on a small table by the bed. On the side of the glass, under the glow of a specialized light, were a few faint smudges that looked like fingerprints. The CSU team leader ordered them to be careful, to seal and collect that glass immediately, and to prioritize it for analysis. The glass tumbler was brought to the forensics lab, carrying the hopes of the entire investigative team. Using dusting powder and other techniques, the forensic experts successfully enhanced and lifted a nearly complete fingerprint from the surface of the glass. The news that they had got a print was quickly relayed to the Columbus PD task force. The fingerprint was immediately digitized and sent to the Ohio BCI to be run through the Automated Fingerprint Identification System AFIS. They did not have to wait long. Just 30 minutes later, the computer returned a result. A match. The fingerprint left at the scene was a perfect match to one in the criminal records database belonging to a subject named Nathan Carter, 36, originally from a rural town in southern Ohio. Carter's file revealed an unsavory history: 3 prior convictions for theft and aggravated assault. He had just been released from prison about a year ago. Carter was a drifter with no stable job, often working as a temporary laborer at construction sites. The face of the killer was finally revealed. An emergency arrest warrant for Nathan Carter was issued immediately. Columbus PD detectives found out. Using law enforcement techniques, they quickly pinpointed Carter's hiding place, a run-down boarding house for construction workers on the outskirts of the city. The raid was planned and executed in a flash. When detectives burst in, Nathan Carter was fast asleep, exhausted after his night of crime. He had no chance to resist and was apprehended in his bed. At the police station, Nathan Carter initially denied everything. He claimed he did not know the victim, Sarah Jenkins, and that he had been sleeping in his room all night. But when investigators placed the forensic report on the table, the one identifying his fingerprint on the glass in the victim's room, his defiant expression began to crumble. He knew any further denial was futile. While the Columbus PD was focused on interrogating Carter for the crime in their jurisdiction, a standard law enforcement bulletin about the case and the suspect's description was sent to police departments in neighboring cities and states a standard procedure for preventing crimes that cross jurisdictions. In Dayton, late one afternoon, Lieutenant Mark Davis was sitting in his office, reviewing the long cold case file for 318H. Suddenly, his computer received an urgent alert from the Crime Information System. He opened it. It was the bulletin from the Columbus Police Department. He scanned the lines. Female victim, 28, lived alone, strangled, sexually assaulted, scene ransacked, signs of robbery. Every detail in the bulletin was like a needle pricking at his attention. The modus operandi, the victimology, it all matched the murder of Anna Tran with shocking similarity. The heart of the case 318H commander began to beat faster. He read on to the information about the arrested suspect. Nathan Carter, 36, multiple prior convictions, a transient. A spark of hope ignited. After 6 months of waiting in vain, the ghost he and his team had been hunting seemed to have finally been unmasked. Without a moment's hesitation, Lieutenant Davis picked up his official phone. His voice filled with urgency and determination, he demanded to be put on the line with the lead detective on the Columbus homicide case immediately. After a quick exchange of information with his counterpart in Columbus, he turned and gave an order to his subordinate, his voice unable to hide his excitement. He instructed them to contact Columbus PD immediately and request that during their legal proceedings, they collect a DNA sample from the subject, Nathan Carter, and send it urgently to the BCI to be compared with the sample they had from case 318H. The urgent request from the Dayton Police Department was quickly fulfilled by the Columbus PD. A blood sample from Nathan Carter, collected according to proper legal procedure, was sealed and sent that very night to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation for DNA analysis. The entire 318H task force held its breath. 6 long months of dead ends, 6 months of living with frustration and guilt. Everything now depended on the result of one scientific test. 2 days later, on an afternoon in late October 2018, a top-secret encrypted file was delivered to Lieutenant Mark Davis's office. His hand trembled slightly as he opened the seal. Inside was the DNA analysis report he had been waiting for so long. He scanned past the complex scientific terminology, his eyes stopping at the final conclusion, printed in bold and underlined. Conclusion: the DNA profile of the subject, Nathan Carter, is a perfect match to the DNA profile of the suspect collected from the vaginal swab of the victim in case 318H R.a.p.e.d. A perfect match. Lieutenant Davis let out a long sigh of relief and lightly slammed his fist on the desk. Finally, an answer. The ghost that had haunted him and his team for half a year finally had a name and a face. The feeling of relief was quickly replaced by a surge of determination. He picked up the phone and ordered a car to be ready, stating that they were going to Columbus. With the DNA match as ironclad evidence, the Dayton Police Department had the legal grounds to charge Nathan Carter with the crime he had committed in their city. A team, led by Lieutenant Davis himself, set off to coordinate with the Columbus PD to transport the subject back to Dayton for an expanded investigation. At the Columbus Detention Center, Nathan Carter had maintained a fairly calm demeanor. He knew that with the fingerprint left at the second crime scene, he had little chance of escaping conviction. But in his mind, it was just one case, and with some evasiveness, he might not receive too heavy a sentence. He had no idea that another crime from his past had been brought back to light. When the detectives from Dayton appeared in the interrogation room, Carter was a little surprised, but then he smirked. He asked if it was them again, stating that he had already told the Columbus cops everything and there was nothing left to say. Lieutenant Davis sat down opposite him, his sharp gaze fixed on the killer. He did not rush into it. He asked Nathan Carter if he remembered what he was doing and where he was around March and April of that year. Carter replied dismissively, asking how he was supposed to remember that. He claimed he worked construction jobs all over, being here today and gone tomorrow, with everywhere being home. Lieutenant Davis said, his voice even but heavy with authority, that he would jog his memory. He stated that at that time, Carter was working as a mason on a construction project in the Wright-Dunbar neighborhood, in Dayton, Ohio, and asked if that was correct. Hearing the word Dayton, the smirk on Nathan Carter's face vanished. He began to feel that something was wrong. He claimed he did not remember and that it must be a mistake. Lieutenant Davis said there was no mistake. He then moved on to talk about Anna Tran, the owner of the hair salon in Quincy Alley. Nathan Carter immediately shook his head frantically. He claimed he did not know her or anyone named Anna. He said he had heard people talking about that case, but it had nothing to do with him. He denied it vehemently. But Lieutenant Davis had anticipated this. He signaled to an investigator. The DNA analysis report was placed on the table, right in front of Nathan Carter. Lieutenant Davis said definitively that Carter could lie, but his DNA could not. He stated that the semen sample he left inside the victim, Anna Tran, after he assaulted her, had identified him. The BCI's forensic report confirmed it was a perfect match to his DNA. He then asked if Carter still wanted to deny it. Nathan Carter looked down at the paper. He did not understand the scientific terms, but he could read his name, the victim's name, and the words perfect match. His entire body began to tremble. The smug, defiant look on his face completely disappeared, replaced by sheer panic and terror. He could not understand. He had been so careful in the first case. He had worn gloves, wiped away any possible trace. How could the police have found him? He did not know that there are biological traces the naked eye cannot see and that can never be erased. Faced with irrefutable scientific evidence, Nathan Carter completely broke down. He knew that any further resistance was futile. He dropped his head to the table, his hands clutching his messy hair. And then, he began to confess. His confession painted the portrait of a depraved and cold-blooded monster. He admitted that while working in Dayton, he had noticed Anna's salon. He was attracted to the single woman's appearance and observed that she was often alone in the evenings, and the salon was located in a quiet alley. A dark plan formed in his mind. On the night of May 3rd, after drinking, he decided to act. He put on gloves and brought a piece of nylon cord he had prepared. He waited until the salon was about to close, then pretended to be a late-night customer wanting a hair wash. While Anna was washing his hair, her guard completely down, he suddenly overpowered her. Despite the victim's pleas and fierce resistance, he brutally raped her. He recounted coldly that after he was done, she threatened to call the police. He got scared and felt he had no other choice, so he used the cord he brought to strangle her until she was dead. After the murder, he calmly ransacked the place, taking all the cash a little over $150 from Anna's drawer. Then he quickly fled the scene, confident that he had not left a single trace. A few days later, he left Dayton and continued his transient life. 6 months later, out of money and with his animalistic urges rising again, he repeated a similar crime in Columbus. And this time, his overconfidence led to his capture. Nathan Carter's confession officially closed case 318H. The debt that the Dayton homicide detectives had carried for half a year was finally paid in full. The case file was quickly completed, detailing 2 heinous crimes committed in 2 different cities. With irrefutable evidence and his own confession, the outcome for Nathan Carter was certain. For the crimes of murder, rape, and robbery, with his animalistic nature, disregard for the law, and no capacity for rehabilitation, only one sentence awaited him: death. That sentence would be a fitting punishment for the terrible crimes he had committed, and the only solace for the souls of 2 unfortunate women. The case stands as a testament to the persistence and determination of law enforcement and as a stark confirmation of an old saying: the mills of God grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. The traces of a crime may fade with time, but justice will never be forgotten.